Yes. Go on.
Yes. Go
What?
on. What? Where are we?
What are we going to rant about now? Go on.
It's the apocalypse.
What apocalypse?
It's the apocalypse. That's what the media is saying all last week. The apocalypse.
Yeah.
Isn't it crazy how, like, after 20 years of us kind of using the term to try and, alert people, not alarm them, not necessarily, but alert people to, there's a lot of problems coming down the pipe, okay?
Mm-hmm.
Now, problems are here for sure, but they're pretty easy, with their use of the word apocalypse. So last week in the UK, headline on the BBC, the impartial BBC, Heatwave apocalypse.
Yeah.
What a pandemic. The new pandemic. Monkeypox pandemic declared. I mean, I don't know. What are they hoping to achieve here? Like, to alert people to the same things that we were trying to alert them to? No, clearly not. It's a weird subversion of, like, the use of words. It's just mangling of everything.
It's the same. They use the same justification. I mean, it's this perennial question we have: is the media lying deliberately, consciously? Members of the media and governments, are they deliberately lying, or in the sense of malevolent, mwahaha, let's lie to people and tell them lies basically about what's actually happening? Let's misrepresent the causes of what's happening and the causes of what's happening. Or do they have a narrative that's perennial, perpetual, time-honored, age-old question, maybe that has always troubled people as to whether people are in authority are actually lying to them on purpose, or whether they're actually they have some kind of a for the greater good narrative that they're well intended but just misguided.
I think it's that. Yeah. The noble lie.
Yeah. In this case, the only thing I can think of is that it's the same as the COVID business. It's there's a lot of twisting, distorting of the facts around what happened over the past couple of years with COVID, and of course more recently to do with vaccines against COVID. And the narrative, I would imagine, is that, well, listen, yes, the truth, the way we present the truth is not the whole truth, it's not all the data. Sure, we're massaging the facts a little bit in a certain direction, but it's to keep people on song, keep them supportive of the science and of vaccinations, etc., going forward, because it would be very bad if people lost trust in science, and if people lost trust, particularly in medical science and in vaccinations, because vaccinations have done so much good over a long period of time. Sorry, and we need to clamp down, and that's their justification for clamping down on anti-vaxxers, for coining the term, I suppose quite a long time ago, anti-vaxxers as a kind of slur, and to clamp down on that, because in their minds it's for the greater good. Yeah, so it's hard to tease it out. It's hard to pick out the actual truth, what's actually true, and what's actually false, and because more often it's a kind of mix of both, which is well known as being something that's much more effective. If you want to get your message across, it's better to not tell a straight up mistruth or straight up exaggeration, or blatant exaggeration, but rather tell the truth and mix in a little bit of massaging of the facts in the direction you want it to go, type thing. So people have that bit of truth or something that sounds right to anchor to, and then they'll go along with it. So I'm trying to stay away from the idea of deliberate conscious malevolence in terms of a lot of these things, because I think that is those events like that or situations like that are few and far between. Where people are consciously lying. Again, it's very subtle. It's like people can be lying. Again, I'm not saying people don't lie. Like, I mean, you had Mike Pompeo last year, or maybe it was last year or the year before. Anyway, talking an interview about West Point, where graduates from West Point, which is a clearinghouse very often for intelligence agencies, including the CIA, for recruits for the CIA. He stated that that when he was at West Point, he was teaching at West Point. I think he was told, or he told the recruits that the three tenets are: we lie, we cheat, and we steal. That's basically what we do. We lie, cheat, and steal. Now, of course, it's for the greater good, right?
Yeah.
So-
That was a soundbite that went viral, but
Yeah. The context of it.
the
Yeah.
full fleshing out of it, he probably would have said, well, of course, that's not just for evil's sake. It's because we have
Yeah.
noble ideas for the US and
Yeah.
the rules-based international order,
Yeah.
as they call it.
You had the former head of the CIA a couple of years ago saying that he was on Fox News talking to Laura Ingram saying
Yeah,
that,
Wolsey.
of course, Wolsey saying, of course, we've carried out coups in other countries, but it was always for good, basically. Those were coups that were, we overthrew. He didn't deny that they overthrew a democratically elected government, but it was for the greater good. Again, that's an example of something that appears to be wrong, immoral, being presented as something that. So it's complicated, and people tend to go black and white on these kind of things and say it's either true or false, it's good or bad. But that's not how most people live their lives, and especially people in position of power. They have narratives, and they have. You got to break a few eggs to make an omelette, blah, blah, blah. It's all for the greater good, blah, blah. And I know someone recently talked also about a coup. Who was that?
Walrus face,
Yeah.
John Bolton.
John Bolton said that he knows how to carry out a coup. And he was referring to, what was he referring to? The coup. He was saying that.
He was referring to, he was discussing
Trump,
with
right. He was
CNN
saying Trump
on
did not
January
try to.
6th,
Trump did not
so
try
he
to
was
have.
defending Trump.
Yes, this wasn't a coup. He was defending him, yeah. He said, well, he was defending him in the sense of saying he's too incompetent.
Yes,
he
he said he was.
wouldn't be smart enough to carry out an actual coup. He
Right.
says, I've been involved in the commission of coups, let's say, or in the carrying out of coups, and it takes a lot of work. You know what I mean? It's not just it's not something you just breeze into and overthrow a government. You got to plan it, and it's got to be detailed. So Trump couldn't have done that. So it's silly to say that he was planning a coup on September 6th. So So getting back to the point, I think the narrative is the reason you have this kind of hysteria in the media around global warming over the past couple of weeks, because there's a heat wave. There's a heat wave in America right now in different places. There's been a heat wave in France. There's been a heat wave in different parts of Europe. A couple of days of a heat wave in the UK. A couple of days literally of a heat wave in the UK. And the media, was going apocalyptic, kind of like you were saying. It's apocalypse. And why are they doing that? Well, that's why I mentioned the fact that it's kind of like COVID. They think that it's justified, morally justified, to exaggerate a situation in order to get people motivated to do something about it. Like, there's danger's approaching, and people are apathetic. So you have to scream bloody murder from the rooftops in order to get people to move. That's how they explain it to themselves, of course. That's got nothing to do with whether or not what they're actually saying is true or not, whether the foundation behind, or the ideas behind, or the science behind global warming, or anthropogenic global warming is actually true or not. That's irrelevant in a certain sense, because that's already been assumed to be true, and therefore you run with it. So it's not that we're necessarily calling them out as liars or exposing these people who promote these things as conscious liars. Our problem is the assumptions on which they are making these for them justifiably exaggerated statements.
Yeah.
The assumptions on which they're making those, the baseline beliefs that they have. I think that was true for COVID as well. Like I just mentioned about vaccinations, you gotta massage the data. You gotta clamp down hard on anti-vaxxers or anybody saying anything counter narrative to the official statement on COVID and on vaccines. You got to shut them up, because that can lead us very quickly to a situation where you have a lot of people who distrust science, distrust medical science. Terrible situation. So anything's allowed to stop that from happening. Almost anything is allowed to stop that happening. Same with global warming,
including tactics they later acknowledged were terroristic, terrifying the population.
Yes,
because as they revealed,
openly admitted,
we're afraid that the population's too complacent.
Right. How do you
terrify
these people into action?
And then later they had to retract. It went too far. People became too strict with the rules.
Yeah. And again, the question there is the underlying assumptions or beliefs that these people have, that justify, or they justify
Yeah.
how they used to justify them taking these kind of punitive, extreme, threatening, aggressive, terrifying, scary, scaremongering measures against the population. What's your base? Okay, that's your justification. You have a justification for that, but what's that based on? It's based on, for example, like with COVID, it would have been based on Neil Ferguson's models that were used by in the UK and in Europe and in the US, where they were wildly out of sync with actual reality. Now, this is from a guy as well who I think his colleagues called him the master of destruction or something like that. Basically, because his modelling going back for most of his career was absolutely terrible. It was wildly wrong.
As far back as like foot and mouth.
He did mad
in
cow
2001,
disease, foot and mouth disease. Yeah, he did bird flu,
on which they culled millions of cattle.
Yeah,
in the
exactly.
early 2000s.
So this is a guy
on
who
his model.
Right. So you're a guy with a proven track record of really wrong modelling of certain situations, and you pull him in for COVID, and he says, 300,000 or 500,000 people in the UK, 2 million people will die in the US, and then you run with that. You do your lockdowns, your extreme measures, all of your messaging, all your behavioural scientist stuff on the population, and it turns out to be false. Well, he made loads of mistakes in the past. Why would that not have been factored into the situation?
Yeah. He may well believe what he's saying, but
Of course,
he has a track record where what he's saying doesn't fit with the facts.
Well, his out, at least in the terms of COVID, was that he had a range from very low to very high. Now, of course, people only talked about the very high because so you're saying he says, look, based on my models, 2 people could die or 500,000 people could die if you do nothing. And they say, well, the two's irrelevant. 500,000? Talk to me about 500,000. Really? I mean, so the whole science, let's say, of modelling and statistics in that sense is just has a big problem with it. Because if you say something like that to the population or to the government, obviously anybody's going to go, well, give me a worst case scenario. And then we're going to go with the worst case scenario.
Yeah.
So anyway, but wildfires in France, it's apocalypse. We're all going to burn to death. Of course, nobody officially said it, but it was all down to global warming, right? There were fires in the UK.
No.
Houses burned in the UK.
They said it.
No, well, obviously they're not saying that the house combusted, which is why they drew a lot of criticism. I mean, there's houses in the UK alongside, in a rural area, let's say, and several of them burned down. And it happened over a 2-day heat wave when the temperatures reached, in certain parts of the UK, up to 38, 39, 40 degrees, but only in a few places, but they're in the high 30s in a lot of places. That's not that unusual for the UK. Maybe a record was broken, but by a couple of degrees. It's happened before. Generally speaking, houses don't combust at 38 to 40 degrees Celsius. So how is this a global warming? How are those dramatic images of houses being burned down directly linked to the heat wave?
They reported that the fires would start in grassland nearby,
Right,
or in backyards or something like that, and then spread through building
and
residential areas.
And how do
they said 41 homes or shops around London were torched.
Right, and they start by the sun, or what? The sun ignites grass in a back garden.
Something start. Well, I guess I presume that they're saying something accidentally starts it, but
And it's directly related to global warming?
No, but they're going to say that the ground was particularly parched, like tinder. All it needed was a match. Accidentally,
Yeah.
they presume.
Or all it needs is one of these. Throw that one up there, Damien. One of those.
That's a Tesla. Electric car sparks huge wildfire in France. That's last week. Interesting, because I heard that was fact checked, and someone posted a photo of an old banger, and they said no, it was a regular diesel car, but it had an electrical fault. That's a counter. That's a Tesla.
Mm-hmm.
Well, are you sure that photo is what started it? Because
Don't know, but
those firefighters arrived at the scene
Yeah.
of the burning car. I don't think the land has caught fire.
Mm-hmm. Well, that might. I don't know if that's exact, but that was the official report. It was suspected. I mean, I didn't see any follow up on it, but the report was initially that that's what happened. Then there's got this.
Suspect in huge French forest fire questioned over arson in 2012.
So the conclusion here is, at least based on these articles, is that if you look at them, it is man-made, not global warming, but man-made forest fires. There's another one from this one's from the UK.
This is last week. Okay, police say wildfires that tore through UK on hottest day may have been arson.
Right.
May have been. Well, they're suggesting it there. I have another local report that a specific fire, huge Scunthorpe fire blaze, was deliberate, says fire service. So they were sure.
Mm-hmm.
So that headline saying, well, yeah, it may be, but at least one of them was definitely arson.
Yeah. This one, it beggars belief. Police and fire slam arsonists after 4 fires in idyllic Saddleworth Moors in the UK. Again. And this one, this next one from... this one was about Spain. So it's been, we've had fires France, UK, Spain. Well, UK didn't have much in the way of fires. The real fires have been in France and Spain and in Portugal a little bit, like serious forest fires. There's been no serious fires to that extent. But this one, a Dutch reforestation company is responsible for a massive forest fire in Spain.
Huh.
Dutch company caused a massive forest fire near Saragossa in Spain. The fire started on Monday when a spark jumped from an excavator.
Okay, accidental though.
Yeah.
But the irony is rich, though, isn't it? A Dutch reforestation company to probably save the planet, climate change, policy, started a fire. I don't know if it was that fire in Spain, but the Spanish PM visited the site where there was one fire and 3 people died. I don't know how, but presumably they couldn't escape the fire. And his statement to the media was simply, climate change kills. Yeah. That's the headline they ran with in Spain. In Spain, where they have obviously brush fires where it reaches 40 C every year. Mm-hmm. The Spanish Prime Minister knows what to say or believes all the sets of assumptions you've outlined before, then goes up in front of camera about a tragic but still regular occurrence every year in Spain and says climate change kills to the Spanish population. Yeah. That's one thing for Brits to have. This is new to them, maybe, except it's not new, of course. When you look back, there have been strange outbreaks of all kinds of fires in the UK, not man-made, going back the last decade. Remember a spate of like moors fires and fires in wetlands?
In wintertime.
It was up in Scotland too.
Gas.
Probably something to do with a natural accelerant outgassing from the ground.
So, but again, like the thing about this is, people were making fun of it across social media and stuff, and I think even people who aren't on social media, particularly in the UK, which is a relatively cool country, but even in France and European countries, they were making fun of the extreme reporting on these fires and the heat wave, and obviously it was for a purpose. It was to awaken people up and to alarm people to the reality, as far as they're concerned, of man-made global warming and how we have to do everything to do whatever is necessary to stop global warming, which primarily, as everybody knows, is to do away with fossil fuels, which is a great transformation that's happening right now. Particularly American politicians, but European politicians as well, are very much upfront and proud and openly telling the population that we're in a wonderful, exciting period of time when there's a great transformation happening, and that transformation is away from fossil fuels, and it can't happen soon enough. The sooner it happens, the better. We got to really take radical action. Again, that leads into the protests that we talked about last week of Dutch farmers who are basically having their lives and their livelihoods taken away from them by Dutch government policies on fertilizer use, which basically forces them to radically reduce their fertilizer use, which means, well, you may as well tell them to shut your farm, because if you have to reduce, in some cases, 87%, reduce your fertilizer use by 87%, and farmers are like, that's not going to work, we might as well just go home now. So that, that's why they're protesting, because they're having their jobs destroyed by government mandate. It also obviously ties into why the Ukraine war is very useful, very strangely dovetailing with this mandate of getting rid of fossil fuels, because it just so happens that the Ukraine war happened, and just all by accident, I suppose, it just happened to happen at this time, and Western governments had no choice, notably, obviously, the American government and Western European governments had no choice but to say, okay, we're shutting off Russia's fossil fuel delivery to us. We're going to cut, of course, that's what they say, right? But it's interesting. It fits with the Great Transition, right? This war is very, very timely, very useful, perfect in a certain sense. I mean, they've been talking about getting rid of fossil fuels for quite a long time, and Europe is, and many other parts of the world are dependent on Russian fossil fuels. Russia launches a special military operation in Ukraine, and boom, we're getting rid of Russia's fossil fuels. We're divesting from Russia. We're reducing our supply, our reliance on Russian fossil fuels. We have to try and source them from elsewhere. But this is a great opportunity to do away with them altogether.
Right. Yeah, definitely. And so when a heat wave comes along, it's another opportunity on a smaller scale to capitalize on it, to push the same noble agenda.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Okay. Did you see the map of where fires broke out in London? It's kind of none of them happened obviously in the city proper. They were all in suburban areas, but it's spread out. Is it random? Well, I don't know how far you want to suggest that setting the fires was like organized. Do you think? Or is it just, it's a combination of an accidental spark here with some people actually going around and capitalizing on the heat wave?
Mixture, I suppose. Could most likely a mixture. I mean, in these kind of situations, there's tooting, ham, some cooked ham down there in around London. Well, was
random or a nice spread.
Well, it's a nice spread, and obviously you have you have a lot of people there, obviously, around in the Greater London area, 11 million people or something like that. So, like I said, it's probably a mix. It doesn't exclude the idea that someone with an actual agenda could have been setting these fires. But there are people that, and by people with an agenda, I mean, if you look at this as a government, if you assume that the government, let's not just assume it, let's state a fact that the government has agenda. Western governments clearly have an agenda to alarm people about global warming, about man-made global warming. This heat wave is an opportunity to push the message, to press the message home, right? If having some fires served that agenda, then maybe some government elements or agents of the government would have taken the opportunity to start some fires and say, hey, look, see, global warming, we got to do something about this. There are other people, obviously, who have a similar agenda, which is the climate extinction rebellion people, who have a tendency to
take extreme measures to
highlight issues,
provoke people and get them to
in the same way as the
think
government
about how
might do it,
important this issue is.
Yeah, I mean, like I mentioned, I think I mentioned it on Twitter or whatever, that this is a fairly common human psychological trait, I suppose, for at least for some types of human beings, because we have evidence in the past of, for example, on other hot button issues like anti-Semitism. You have had Jews in the past who have gone around daubing swastikas on synagogues in an effort to highlight the fact that anti-Semitism, except this was a Jew who's against anti-Semitism, highlighting it by creating anti-Semitism himself, which would seem to not prove his point in a certain sense, where he's forced to go and daub swastikas on a synagogue because no actual anti-Semites are bothered to do it, which suggests that there isn't really an anti-Semitism problem. But this guy believes there really is, but it's just not being recognized. So he has to carry out some anti-Semitic acts in order to highlight anti-Semitism. The same is true of, Jussie Smollett, for example. An example of racism, anti-racism activists in the US in particular, creating or carrying out racist attacks on people in order to highlight
the systemic racism in our society.
Racism, which is so strong that I have to do it myself in order to bring attention to it. So there are people like that. The same with climate activists. Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if some of them at least had the idea that, hey, if we throw a few burning matches or flick a few cigarette butts into that field, it might get some attention to the problem. Because they're going around like, what are they doing? It seems to be, the thing these days seems to be amongst those kinds of people is to superglue your hand to famous paintings to bring attention to climate change.
Right, I've seen that.
So
it's crazy.
Whatever. So yeah, all of the above. Like, so try and pick it out of that. Accidental, normal stuff. Whenever there's a heat wave, people who a piece of glass, discarded bottle or something starts a fire. People flicking a cigarette butt, not intentional, starts a fire. Cars that catch on fire and spread, climate extinction rebellion type people deliberately starting it, LARPers doing it for shits and giggles, also in there, and then you also have possible government agenda, government agents, burning things down in order to serve the civic agenda. So, yeah, it's a real broad mix there,
Okay, do you think there is anything, if you put aside their hysteria about it and the narrative, the capitalization of it for so-called noble agendas, right? Do you think there's anything objective to, was there anything particular about this heat wave that is different?
Yeah, it's definitely. I mean, obviously, well, there have been. I mean, you can't deny the fact that there have been heat records broken, spottily, fairly intense heat, and changing weather patterns. But this is a totally different topic in a certain sense, where you have to look at it over a long period of time. And sure, the weather is, the climate is changing. It seems to be around the world, and people are experiencing the weather changing in their particular areas. But it's not uniform. It's not uniformly warm. Obviously, so it's a bit oversimplistic to just call it man-made global warming, because even the scientists who promote that theory will say that it's obviously not just about warming. You're talking about they claim anyway that you'll have colder winters as well. So it's a broad, and also more extreme weather in general. So just more hurricanes, more tornadoes. But it's obviously very complicated, and we don't really we're not on that side of the fence in that respect. If we have to call it, at least, or my view anyway, is that it's something much more complex, and it's not down to human activity. The changing weather patterns, which are changing, and changing climate, which is changing in different ways, in chaotic ways, is not mostly due to human activity. Let's say there are other major factors, but that's a totally different topic. Like I said, we need a whole show to talk about that. But yeah, suffice to say, it's more celestial stuff like the sun, etc., that drives climate on the planet. So
Well, just on the facts on the ground, the European Forest Fire Information System says that this year has seen just shy so far of 40,000 hectares burned in Europe, which makes it the second largest area burnt in wildfires in 14 years, with only 2019 being more destructive at 43,000 hectares. That could probably be beaten then, I presume, because there's still a month and a half of hot weather to go probably in Western Europe. So that might, that might actually speak to, there being a basic fact on the ground that would ordinarily be worth drawing people's attention to. This is what I meant at the top of the show, though. The manner in which it's done is insane. Heatwave apocalypse, like the end of the world.
Yeah.
Well, no, it's something to sit up and take note of, but not to go completely
But come on.
nuts about.
What did they say? I mean, how did people perceive COVID?
Right. Well, they were asked to perceive it as the new Black Death,
Right.
in which half the population died from buboes and pustules. And
Right. So on the heels of that, I'm just drawing a connection between the two. The hysteria around COVID, the extreme messaging around COVID, the terrorizing of the population around COVID and lockdowns and all that kind of stuff, and then the extreme manipulation around vaccines, and then it's segueing almost seamlessly into hysteria and apocalyptic type language around weather. Is it because people just got the media? I mean, again, you have to look at agendas here. The media loves a good sensationalist story. The media is never going to look askance at that, an opportunity to get clickbait. They're basically getting money. They get more money. The more outrageous and hysterical and alarmist the headline, the more money they get. That, for me, that's an explanation right there as to why it's being reported in this way. Again, there's obviously other reasons as well. Like I said, it's maybe they just got used to the, people psychologically. So leaving aside the monetary aspect inside journalism and even in government, pushing an agenda, it's just psychologically people are in that headspace where everything's tense and disastrous, and some rough beast is slouching towards Western Europe and America, slouching westwards. So and they have that in their head, and that's just where they are. That's just where they're at. So anything they look at anything and they're going to interpret it in those terms. Everything's gone to hell. It's everything. The world is in a terrible state. We're all facing the abyss. We're all looking into the abyss. Are people feeling that? I mean, is that manufactured? Or are people feeling that because there is something coming down the line? Are things going to get worse? Has this past number of years or whatever been the beginning of a process, or the beginning of a downward slide into a kind of like, some form of collapse of Western society or global society, where everything starts to fall apart and people are picking up on that? Or is it all self-generated in a certain sense? I mean, because people, the madness of crowds, you can hysterize people over nothing and they'll all run off a cliff when they didn't need to. And then they say, well, that was the apocalypse of those people who ran off the cliff. Yeah, but they didn't have to.
It was real for them.
Yeah, but they didn't have to. It was self-generated. So I suppose you're getting a bit philosophical there in terms of determinism and
objective reality versus
free will versus determinism, or whatever.
Mass
is it all
delusion.
faded? Yeah.
So and the other thing, like just yesterday, the World Health Organization, it's been humming around for 6 months now, declares monkeypox a pandemic.
Yeah, again, the band's going to make it. We don't want to let this one go. We're on the whole pandemic bandwagon is rolling, and it can't be allowed to just peter out. It has to keep going. So is there a vested interest there? What is the agenda?
Well, let's read a mainstream report about how it was announced. I saw this is from the Telegraph. The WHO has declared monkeypox a global health emergency.
Moneypox?
Monkeypox.
I thought it said moneypox.
So Tedros, never good pronounce
Is that
his
K
name.
silent? Are you sure the K isn't silent? Anyway, carry on.
The WHO's Director General took the unprecedented step of overruling a panel of advisors to make the designation.
They've been doing that a lot.
Okay. Shouldn't he have been following the science?
No. That was last year, Neil. So last year, follow the science. Let's follow Ted now. Follow the Ted. Yeah.
Yeah. Tedros
So
ignored his own expert committee after 9
take it back
voted against the designation and only 6 in favor.
Mm-hmm.
It was the first time the UN Health Agency chief had unilaterally made such a decision without an expert
It's a bit
recommendation.
dictatorial, isn't it? The supreme ruler of the World Health Organization overrules. No democracy there, is it? 6 out of 10, and he says, "Meh, democracy
So-
sucks. I never liked it." Yeah. Well, I mean, is this something we should all be concerned about, or
Oh, absolutely.
it is?
Yeah.
I don't know. Are you sure it's not just a certain minority, but growing demographic in the in the population, or because this is an interesting story here from the Guardian. It's an actual got pictures and everything. Some guy from the horse's mouth, New Yorker, describes this harrowing ordeal to receive care through a system under-equipped to handle another pandemic. So it's already a pandemic, according to someone in the Guardian. There's some pictures there, horrific pimples, basically. Hit 3 in his elbow, 1 in his face. Anyway, opening line: "I got monkeypox and it's been a total nightmare." And then, a bit revealing, next line: "When New York Pride festivities kicked off on 24th of June, I was aware that monkeypox was an emerging issue, especially for gay men. But I was also under the impression that the number of cases in the city was relatively small." Blah, blah, blah. Second paragraph, even more revealing. "I had sex with several guys over the weekend. Then a week later, on the 1st of July, I started feeling very fatigued. I had high fever with chills and muscle aches, and my lymph nodes were so swollen they were protruding 2 inches out of my throat." Anyway, so this person, he's a 39-year-old man from Sweden living in Brooklyn and working in philanthropy, as he says.
Philanthropy.
Um,
So he works for an NGO, basically, which employ about a third of millennials these days.
Yeah. So he got rashes and T-pox and that kind of stuff. It's kind of worth reading in a way. If you just scroll down there to below the, there's a little advertisement. Just go back to the article, Damien, will you? Let's scroll down to the next day. I got my. Keep going, yeah. Yeah, there you go. The next day I got my STI results because he said when he would be tested for monkeypox, he would be tested for sexually transmitted diseases too, and he was positive for gonorrhea. But no word yet on the monkeypox. And he got hives everywhere and anorectal lesions. Yeah, it's great. And so anyway, he was just complaining about the kind of how long it took him to get the pills. And there's a part. Let me just see if I can find it here. So yeah, down at the bottom there, second last paragraph. The whole thing just feels like a huge failure that should not have been allowed to happen, especially not 2.5 months into the outbreak. If someone like me who has worked in sexual health for a long time. It's like, it's kind of like physician. He's not a physician, but works in sexual health. Heal thyself, i.e., in that second paragraph,
Yeah.
or the, yeah.
Well, this is part of the world that a lot of people, not just gays either, they live in, where they've normalized promiscuity. They think they can just incorporate it into. Well, apparently nature has other ideas, guys. I'm sorry, but here's a quick summary from Peter McCullough, arguably I think he is the most cited MD in the United States. He summarizes the situation with this monkeypox, quoting a study from New England Journal of Medicine. 98%. So first of all, there's only 17,000 cases for sure globally so far. 5 deaths, right? Citing this New England Journal of Medicine study summarizes 98% of cases are gay or bisexual. 41% have concurrent HIV. 95% is transmission by sexual activity. There have been no deaths so far. I mean, I'm no doctor.
You missed the 13%. You missed the 13%.
I don't want to have to say it like, I know what goes wrong with them when they have. But what do you expect when they're like engaging in that kind of thing? Okay. I'm no doctor, but that's basically describing an STD. Yeah, it's a virus, but it's an STD.
Yeah. Yeah.
So the World Health Organization has just announced a global pandemic for an STD that's transmitted almost exclusively
Amongst the gays.
between gays. What does that have to do with me?
Well, they just don't make pandemics like they used to.
Or 98% of other people.
Yeah. Yeah. What have I got here? Oh yeah.
But yeah, it gets worse actually.
Check the yeah. Check this out here. This is just a headline from the Daily Mail on that topic of the monkeypox. Sorry. I don't know. Does it bring it to another level, or is it just I don't know. I don't know what to say about that headline, to be honest.
Well,
Yeah.
it's disturbing. It's disturbing. I mean, the U.S. records first 2 child monkeypox cases. California, a toddler and an infant in D.C. were likely infected by, quote, household contacts. And both children had contact with gay or bisexual men, CDC chief says. And given what we've just learned, that 95% of cases are sexually transmitted, connect the dots. So yeah, it's just so
Well,
fucking
we should
disturbing.
roll out a monkeypox vaccination for children then.
For children, I don't know. What are they saying about a vaccine? Smallpox vaccine, roll up, everyone get them?
Mm-hmm.
I presume they're not going to go full COVID.
No,
with this.
no, they're not going to go full COVID again.
This is just
They can't.
This is almost like there is something real going on here, and it should concern people in certain parts of society. But that's all there is to it. But because, like you say, we're on the back of hysteria about. It's like when you put pandemic with this and pandemic with COVID, you clearly have to use a different term because arguably then pandemic of COVID with pandemic of, say, Black Death, plague, you still need a third term where actually 1 or 2 people are killed. You know what I mean?
Well, they haven't used the term pandemic. They're not saying pandemic for monkeypox yet.
Didn't the World Health Organization declare it's a pandemic?
No.
What did I just read? What was that headline?
Emergency.
Global emergency. So that's what? Well, okay. 1 step short of it, is it?
They do actually still need the numbers to declare the pandemic, even though they reduced they changed the definition of the pandemic for COVID to reduce the number of people or the scope of the spread from what it had been for decades and decades, for forever. I think they changed the term pandemic in order to allow COVID, the numbers they had for COVID to be a pandemic. But certainly 5 people, 5 deaths, and mostly gay guys is, they'd have to change the definition of pandemic radically again to declare the pandemic. Yeah. I don't know. Whatever. Whatever. It's clown shoes, man. It's not just clown shoes. It's like I was saying to Anna there a while ago. It's kind of like it's not just clown shoes. It's like governments and authorities in the Western world today are slowly putting on a clown outfit, and they start with the shoes. So it's like they put on the clown shoes, and then they give you a while, and then they put on the fancy clown, the floppy clown pants, and then they give you a while to adjust to that, and then they put on the top, and then slowly they put on the makeup and the red nose and the big thing and the flower that squirts water. Do it step by step, so that by a certain point it's actually a clown standing in front of you, authoritatively telling you what the reality of the day is, and you go, this is normal, that's a normal person, because it's slowly he's been clownified. The whole situation has been clownified. People are brought along with clownish, ridiculous, irrational statements bit by bit, and they're left to sit for a while, to ferment in the vat of the public mind or something, to mature, to filter down until people normalize it, and then they go to the next stage. Seems to be the way it's happening, because it really is. I mean,
It's a good meme.
Yeah, it is a good meme, the clown meme. But COVID itself hasn't gone away. BA4, BA5, this is post-Omicron variants now that are still pretty much nothing burgers in the sense of, in terms of the severity of them. They're, as with the vast majority of viruses, once they mutate, they lose function and become less virulent, less able to do what they're originally meant to do, and they just provoke a more a lesser immune response, and also you build up your own people who are exposed to it, which is at this point is the vast majority of people in any population has been exposed to COVID of some type. They have that immunity to it, and it's lasting immunity. Obviously, if you get exposed to a variant, say over the past couple of years, you've developed, naturally you develop strong natural immunity, which is the best immunity, despite what the science says. It's obviously for healthy individuals, it's the best immunity, and that immunity then, again, based on studies and all that kind of stuff, but also based on the basic tenets of virology. As viruses mutate, they become less functional, which means that you are likely to have immunity to future variants because they're less functional. They're not. It's like, I don't know. It's like when you've I don't know what analogy I could use. If you fight someone or something, you're in a battle with someone, you chop off their arm. When they come at you again, it's easier to deal with them because they've only got one arm from the last time they interacted with you or something like that. But this is reflected in the actual data as well. If you just throw up those two JPEGs, Damien, this is hospitalizations in the UK. This is from Our World in Data. In hospital. It's not the UK. It's across UK, Australia, Ireland, Japan, Canada, US, and the Netherlands. Numbers on the left there and time along the bottom. So from March 25th up until a couple of days ago, these are numbers. So highest there at this point, United Kingdom's quite high in terms of hospital patients. COVID-19 patients in hospital per million people. So in the UK, it's somewhere around 250, and down from that, Australia, Ireland, 200, 150, Japan, 100, US, below 100 per million now. Netherlands, about just above 50. So this is hospitals. These are people who are in hospital. Are they COVID-19 patients? Obviously, the data isn't, they're not collecting that level of data, or at least it's not being published. Comorbidities, probably, possibly, who knows? Severity of COVID, meh, probably not much at this point. The kind of variants that are around aren't causing severe disease, they're causing just like general cold-like or flu-like symptoms. In people with fairly serious comorbidities, a flu-like or cold-like a situation can be a bit worrying if you've also got COPD or any other serious underlying condition. That's why you might be in hospital, but you're not really in hospital for COVID-19. There's not many people. There's basically no healthy people in hospital with the variant of COVID-19 that's going around right now, because it really is flu or cold-like, and you don't go to hospital for a flu or a cold. But if you just jump to the next one, it's actually deaths. ICU, not deaths. Same countries. Again, just to give you an idea of how severe this pandemic is at this point, those are the numbers on the side. Highest numbers are 12 per million people. So you're talking about Japan, 8 people per million, Canada, Australia, 6, Ireland, 4, United Kingdom and the Netherlands, about 2 people per million are in ICU for COVID. Again, comorbidities almost undoubtedly, and therefore not really in hospital. The point is, this variant is not putting healthy people in hospital, and certainly not putting them in ICU. It's causing people, like any other virus could do, people with serious comorbidities into hospital, because it's the straw that breaks the camel's back type thing, So that's just some, as an update, like basically that's where we're at, and that's the same around the world basically. It's really is nothing we're going. So there can be no lockdowns based on this, and any other future variants. What are they going to do? They're going to have diminished function going forward. So COVID's over. COVID's done. Of course they still want to sell vaccines to people, because it's very lucrative. At this point, that can be really the only real reason for them to be pushing still strongly for extra boosters and all that kind of stuff, is to get rid of the stock that they have, and for Big Pharma to keep banking it. I'll give you an example, like of how it's politics. Well, on COVID, like obviously there's hospitalizations and all that kind of stuff, but what about restrictions? Masks coming back? Are there any masks coming back?
I've heard, yes, France and Germany. A lot of places
Well,
seem to be doing it a lockstep as well.
Possibly in California, they're going to vote on it this week, whatever, for schools and stuff like that. But this is just, I pulled this from, I don't know, from US government website, whatever, Transport Authority, or I don't know, something like that, Department of Foreign Affairs or something like that. Right now, if you're not an American citizen, you need you need to be fully vaccinated.
This is to enter the US.
To enter the US, you need to be fully vaccinated.
Yeah.
You have to show proof of vaccination. That's an example there. But the interesting thing is, a person who has received only one dose of an accepted 2-dose series and has recovered from COVID does not meet this definition, and therefore is not considered fully vaccinated, right? CDC has not recommended the use of mix and match COVID-19 vaccine series. However, such strategies are increasingly common in many countries. I say, therefore, for the purpose of interpreting vaccination records for the travel in the United States, CDC will accept combinations of accepted COVID-19 vaccines. Anyway, at the top, you're considered fully vaccinated 2 weeks after your dose of accepted single-dose vaccine, 2 weeks after your second dose of an accepted 2-dose vaccine, full series of accepted 19 vaccines, after you receive 2 doses of any mix and match combination. Basically what they're saying is, fully vaccinated in the US is 2 vaccines. The original one. The one that everybody got, most people who were getting it got by mid last year, over a year ago. Most people had that 2-dose vaccines. Now, do I need to say, I think everybody knows at this point, right, that the reason we're having boosters and we're on our 4th booster now is because it's accepted. It's not heresy to say that those 2 original doses of vaccine don't work anymore when you got them last year. They run out after 3 months, depending on the person, 3-4 months, whatever. They're no longer useful. That's why you have to get a booster, right?
Yeah, 2 at this point.
Huh? Yeah, but that's why there's boosters, right?
Uh-huh.
Because the original 2 doses that everybody got, that you signed up for, don't work anymore. They don't work after 3 months, 3-4 months. At most, maybe 6 months. So we're a year into it now, and the US still has a rule that you have to be fully vaccinated to go to the US. But fully vaccinated is your 2 doses, which at most became completely useless to you last December.
Which is crazy.
Explain it to me.
Isn't it? No, I can't. It's crazy.
Basically, people who have no protection against COVID.
I'm confused. Are you saying you can't get into the US unless you're...
Mm-hmm.
I thought they were just...
If you're foreign national, yeah.
If you're not a US citizen. So... But surely there are people who are not vaccinated who are getting into the US. It's not Canada. Right? Joe Rogan was bitching about that communist dictator in Canada because you couldn't leave or get in.
Mm-hmm.
Regardless of who you were, if you weren't vaccinated.
You can leave America.
If you're unvaccinated.
And if you're an American citizen, you can leave and get back in. But you have to do a PCR. But I think if you're an unvaccinated, you have to show a negative PCR. But if you're a foreign national, if you're basically a visitor, you can't get into the US without being quote-unquote fully vaccinated. And according to the American government, fully vaccinated is having received 2 doses of a vaccine that at this point give you 0 protection. So tell me it's not politics. And also tell me that Djokovic, what's his first name?
Novak. That's his joke name.
Novak Djokovic, who won Wimbledon a couple of weeks ago, and was obviously allowed to play in it, is not allowed to play at the US Open, happening soon, because he's not vaccinated. But... So in theory, and that's that is in line with those rules. Like, he's a foreigner, so he's not allowed into. It's not that he's just not allowed to play at the US Open. He's not allowed into the US because he doesn't have a 2-dose vaccine. a 2-dose vaccine that, if he had got it last year, would provide him with zero protection at this point. Doesn't need to have a booster. But a vaccine that basically is not working anymore would allow him to go to the US. Because health? Because stopping COVID? Because stopping transmission? It doesn't stop transmission anyway. What's the point? Tell me what the point is, Neil. What's the point of all this?
Control.
Or
money.
Or propaganda. It's purely politics.
Yeah.
If someone tells me that I can't come into a country because I'm not properly immunized in a way that does not provide me any immunization, then obviously...
Obviously, the science is left by the wayside. Well, Deborah Birx, she was up there with Fauci going back to the beginning of this. She was Team Fauci in the US government's official COVID response team in 2020. She's on the media last week saying, yeah, we knew when we rolled out the vaccines that they wouldn't stop infections.
But we just
didn't
know what to say.
You weren't saying that at the time. I think she's probably BSing herself. She's adapted her self-narrative after the fact, as much as it is, CYA to try and say, well, we oversold it a bit, but she still blabs, though. I don't know if we want to play it, but she still blabs, oh, it was important anyway, because something. She didn't give a straight answer. She certainly didn't give a scientific answer.
Have you got Tucker there?
Yeah, well, I mean...
Stick him up.
We're being cautious about, not discussing...
Will we get a copyright strike for playing Tucker?
No.
No?
No, it's news. It's publicly available info. That's only if it's, I don't know...
Disney? Or
movie
Netflix?
Or a song or something. This is Tucker Carlson talking. I mean, he's talking about now, so and his video's up on YouTube, so whatever. Vaccine harms, which and what he's going to talk about are 2 studies published in the last few months.
Link to neurodegenerative disease, myocarditis, Bell's palsy, liver disease, impaired adaptive immunity, impaired DNA damage response, etc. So it's possible, in fact, it's looking likely, that the vaccine might suppress the immune system. This fact, the authors concluded, will, quote, have a wide range of consequences, not the least of which include the reactivation of latent viral infections and the reduced ability to effectively combat future infections, end quote. Now, again, we sincerely hope that's not true. But it's not just the conclusion of one scientific journal. The Lancet, maybe the most famous scientific journal in the world, released similar findings in February. The Lancet's piece was entitled, quote, Risk of Infection, Hospitalization, and Death Up to 9 Months After a Second Dose of COVID-19 Vaccine. A physician called Kenji Yamamoto made this observation about the data from the Lancet. He wrote this in a letter to the Journal of Virology, and we're quoting, the study showed that immune function among vaccinated individuals 8 months after the administration of 2 doses of COVID-19 vaccine was lower than that among the unvaccinated individuals. Now your first response, if you're a humane person, to a line like that has got to be deep sympathy. Because people were misled, they were forced. Medical ethics thrown out the window. People were forced to take medicine they didn't want. And some of them may have been hurt by it. And you don't have to take this man's word for it. Pull up the Lancet study yourself. You won't find anything of the text of the article saying what Kenji Yamamoto said, which is weird. Why would the Lancet want to hide a major finding like that? We can't say. But if you look at Table 3 in the piece, here's what you'll find buried in the data. Among people around the age of 80 who have been double vaccinated, that would include people like Joe Biden, the per capita rate of medical incidences, including hospitalizations or death, is nearly twice as high as the rate of serious incidents for the unvaccinated. This is 180 days after vaccination. What is that? And why is no one interested?
Yeah, good question. Just on those two studies. The first one, I mean, there's more than that, and again, it's hard to find. There is some data that, in terms of questioning vaccines, or efficacy of vaccines, or what they say about vaccines and the side effects from vaccines. There is data coming out bit by bit, but it's heavily censored, and it's because there's people are bought into people. Most scientists are know that it's very bad. It's a very bad career move to come out and diss vaccines or to expose vaccines as not having worked, because they are the savior of the human race, right? They saved us from certain doom and death and destruction over the past 2 years. That's the official narrative. This is the first one he refers to, and you see the four names there. Those four people are all anti-vaxxers, dismissed as anti-vaxxers, crank scientists, all that kind of stuff. Peter McCullough is a doctor, a scientist. Greg Nye is a nutritionist. Stephanie Seneff is at MIT. She's a computer scientist, and the other guy, Anthony Kurapopoulos, is actually a microbiologist. Anyway, I'm not saying there's anything wrong with their credentials. It's just that they have. It's more than just this paper. I mean, they didn't just come up with this paper. They're not straight down the middle scientists who suddenly saw the light and have published this paper. They're simply publishing a paper that is the basis of stuff. Is based on their perspective or their statements on vaccines going back quite a while now, So that's that first one that he's referring to. So I mean, I'm not saying you can dismiss it. I'm just saying that it has been and is being dismissed because of the people who authored it. The other one is. Which one? Yeah, okay, that was that one. The other one is that he mentions the Lancet, and it's better, I suppose, in a certain sense, because these are the authors of this study in the Lancet are solid. At the top there, you can see it's a man and wife thing, Anna Nordstrom and Peter Nordstrom and Marcel Ballin. No anti-vaxxers amongst those at all. Straight down the middle. And that's why Tucker was saying basically that, it's funny because they don't draw the conclusion. Someone else, a Japanese guy, had to look at it and say, hang on a minute, you didn't mention this little finding in your study, in your research. You didn't highlight that because they would say, well, that's not relevant. It's just a little... But we can actually look at it here. If you just go down to... you got to scroll down a good bit, Damien. Scroll down to table 3. There's a bunch of boxes. Keep going. Yeah, keep going on down past that. That's table 1. That's table 2, and then the next table is table 3. So table 3. If you just scroll down inside table 3, if you can, put your cursor in the middle and just scroll down and go down to on the left hand side there. You see the days, 61 to 120 days. 121 to 180 days, and then the last one is 180 days and more. And so the piece of data that he's actually referencing, that this Japanese guy was referencing from this, because all the other data shows that vaccines are effective for all the different age groups. In this one, over 180 days, they only include they just do. Previously, they had done different age groups. Here, they just do age under 80 and age over 80, and the actual data, if you look across at the over 80 there, the number of people, 67,085. The second column is the number of events. The third column is the incidence per 100,000 people, basically, per capita. And that's for vaccinated. And then the next one is the number of events, and then incidence per 100,000 people for unvaccinated. So basically, the numbers that are the relevant numbers there are the 1.0 on the second row. That's incidence. The incidence per 100,000 people over 80 years at 80 years or more at 180 days of the incidence of hospitalization and death or whatever. In unvaccinated people, 1.0, and 2 columns across, 1.8 in vaccinated people. So it's almost twice the risk per capita in this particular age group, which is 80 years old.
The most vulnerable, after all.
The most vulnerable, and at 180 days. So that's it, basically. That's it. In terms of that's that. Again, it's a data point, but I suppose the authors of it would say, well, that's you're talking about 80 years old plus. You're talking about a long time after the vaccination, which was what, 6 months, 180 days, 6 months after the vaccination. They would say, well, obviously those people need boosted, need extra boosters, But it shows at a baseline that it's, you could argue that, okay, forget about boosters. You have unvaccinated people, 80 years old, and you have vaccinated people, 80 years old. And 6 months after having the vaccine, people 80 years old plus have almost twice the risk of severe COVID than the unvaccinated people, bringing up the questions.
Mm-hmm.
What did the vaccine do to their immune system? Why are they more at risk? That's just per capita, across the board.
Mm-hmm.
It's not, it's not talking about, health status or anything like that. It's simply a broad statement that people in that age group have twice the risk of severe COVID. And a reasonable conclusion is it's because they got vaccinated, that they're impaired. Their immune system is impaired.
And there's a simple explanation for why it took another outside observer, this Kenji guy, to write to the Lancet and say, you should have highlighted that in your abstract or conclusion, which is that the authors saw it. Of course they did, but they were afraid to, because, like you said, they were straight down the middle scientists. They're neutral on this issue. They want to keep it that way. Money, grants, position.
Well, and there's also data. Like, I mean, there is some data, and it makes sense, and people have talked about it. Although there's precious few, if any, studies that have actually looked deeply into it. But the idea is that having been vaccinated, it's a bad idea to be vaccinated with a vaccine that's against a specific variant, like the Delta, like those people who got the two dose vaccine, or even the booster and stuff, is against the original variant, the original Delta variant, let's say, which is a bad idea as the virus mutates and changes. Having been vaccinated against this Delta variant that no longer exists primes your immune system in the wrong direction. Effectively, it primes your immune system to look for a variant that no longer exists, leaving you more exposed, which is what that data would suggest, leaving certain people anyway who don't have who don't have the best immune system anyway because they're older, leaving them vulnerable to infection by less serious variant, but still nonetheless exposing them, making them more vulnerable to a variant that is very different from the variant that their vaccine was designed to combat. Just one of the problems, one of the arguments you could, I think, reasonably and scientifically and everything else make against the whole vaccine situation. That I don't think anybody would, at least in theory, in the absence of any actual studies looking into it in depth, it's not something that anyone could take any issue with in terms of the theory of it, because it's a sound theory that if you're vaccinating someone against a particular variant.
Oh well, it's Fauci's theory.
Yeah.
Do you want to hear what Fauci said in 1999 about introducing vaccines during a pandemic? I mean, let's have a listen.
Many scientists are beginning to believe that a vaccine against AIDS may be impossible to make and too dangerous to test.
If you take it and then a year goes by and everybody's fine, then you say, okay, that's good. Now let's give it to 500 people. And then a year goes by and everything's fine. You say, well, then now let's give it to thousands of people. And then you find out that it takes 12 years for all hell to break loose. And then what have you done?
What have you done? Indeed, St. Tony.
Well, he's not. He's short on details, or why is that a problem? What does he mean all hell breaks loose?
Well, he was talking there about an improperly tested vaccine.
Right.
And of course, here we just rushed out,
right.
mRNA frickin'
right.
whatever the hell it is, type of new experimental vaccine.
But
on
there's
the
a-
population, and it doesn't work.
There's other video, I'm pretty sure, of him actually being more specific about it, which is talking about it's a bad idea to vaccinate, to roll out mass vaccination during a pandemic, specifically because it hasn't settled. The virus hasn't settled down into a stable variant that is just going to take its place amongst all the other seasonal viruses that like flu and cold viruses that float around. That while it's still mutating, it's a very bad idea to vaccinate people, because which point
What are you vaccinating?
what are you vaccinating against? You're vaccinating against the original one, and now it's not there anymore. And are you, because he knows, I mean, he's not stupid, right? The stuff that we're talking about is stuff that's well known, and has been well known to epidemiologists for decades. And that's why it's weird. I think there's some kind of omerta going on, or some kind of, they're all cowed into silence about it, because it can't be that strange. It can't be, it's not fringe science to say what we're saying here, which is that, and they know it, which is that don't vaccinate people against a variant while it's mutating, because you're going to vaccinate. You're going to, not only are you going to be vulnerable to, you're not vaccinating them against the variant that's going to come along, but you're actually misdirecting their immune system towards that original variant, leaving them immune to later variants. You know what I mean? It's not just that it's not going to work, but you're actually impairing their immune system.
Yeah, and you're forcing what Geert van den Bosch described. You're putting pressure on that virus that's already extremely mutagenic, and you're pressurizing it into doing something possibly even more crazy.
Maybe.
This was common sense, I thought, into 2020. It turns out it's not, but like, it's like the thing with the immune system, you know. They see, the way things developed over the last 2 years, they seemed to pretend initially that it didn't exist, that immunity is only conferred by vaccines. And we saw last week a couple of headlines where they're like surprised. The studies show that actually, you know, you do have an immune system, an innate immune system. I don't know.
Well, I mean, the only
I
thing,
thought it was common sense until 2 years ago.
yeah, but you know, money talks. You know, you have to allow for the fact that.
So I'm surprised to learn that you can't get into the US if you're a foreigner, unless you're quote unquote fully vaccinated.
Yeah, they haven't dropped that. You know, other countries
Public
dropped it.
servants are still being fired in Australia for not remaining fully vaccinated, where the definition is now 4, not 2, 4. They're firing police in Australia.
This one is there's also a thing about kids now, right? They've been rolling out vaccines for kids, or trying to roll out vaccines for kids, and they have done, at least in the US. They're approving vaccines for children, not just 5 to 11 years old, but below 5, from basically toddlers between 6 months and 5 years old. But this one is a study from done in Singapore. It's published in the New England Journal of Medicine, and it just looks at vaccination effectiveness of the mRNA vaccine, COVID vaccine, against Omicron in children, published July 20th, which is a few days ago. And if we just, on that one, if we just search for, well, I'll just give you an idea. They, if you look at the results there, it says under methods, total, there was 255,936 children. It's at the top, yeah, it's up there. Were included in the analysis. Something about 20% of them were unvaccinated, and the rest was split between 1 dose and two doses. But if you just do a search for oxygen, the word oxygen. So in the study, 255,000 kids, only 288 hospitalizations over the period of these children, and among hospitalized children, only 5 received supplemental oxygen, and 4 were admitted to the intensive care unit. Of these 5 children, 1 was unvaccinated, 2 were partially vaccinated, and 2 were fully vaccinated. Now, okay, so that's between partially and fully vaccinated. That's a 4-to-1 ratio of kids in ICU and 1 needing oxygen. 5 needing supplemental oxygen of the 288. So, but if you look for then, well, admittedly, there were significantly more children who were vaccinated. Between the 1 dose and 2 doses, it was 80% of the population. So of course you're going to have more of them in amongst the hospitalized and ICU, right? It's that old thing where it's like, well, if everybody's been vaccinated, of course you're going to have more people in hospital who are vaccinated, right? So the same applies here, because the majority, 80%, were either 1 or 2 dose vaccinated. So you can't draw anything necessarily from that. But we're talking here about risk to children is the main thing. So of 255,000 children, 288 were hospitalized. Again, they don't say anything about what the hospitalization was, but the more importantly was needed supplemental oxygen and were in ICU. There's only 5. Just search then for, so that's the risk basically. The point of this is that's the risk for children. Vaccinated or not vaccinated, 255,000 children in Singapore, only 5 of 255,000 ended up in ICU. Sorry, 4 were admitted to intensive care of the 5, but 5 needed supplemental oxygen, let's say. So 5. So out of 255,000 children, the risk of COVID, in terms of it being severe disease where a child would need supplemental oxygen, is 5 out of 255,000, right? Just that's a fairly low risk, right? Just for parents deciding whether or not they want whether their children should get vaccinated.
Right.
That suggests not really that big of a risk. Why would you bother? But 5 out of 255,000? I mean, the rest who are in hospital might have had just a bit of a cold or a flu, because you take a lot of, I mean, especially as a kid, if a kid gets a bit breathless or something, you might take them to hospital, they might be hospitalized. When you hear hospitalization, it doesn't really mean anything, you know what I mean? Especially depending on who you're looking at, but with, especially when they break it down with ICU and needing oxygen. But anyway, if you just search then for, so that's a risk from COVID, let's say, of severe COVID for children, 5 out of 255,000. If you just search then for the word adverse, ADVERC. So of these, in Singapore, 22 serious adverse events after vaccination among children, 5 to 11 age, were reported to the Health Service Authority. So out of the same number of children, 22 had severe adverse reactions, compared to 5 needing serious hospitalization. So for a parent, those are your numbers, at least from this study in Singapore of a big, large quantity of children, 255,000. Basically, if from a statistical point of view, there's 4 times
more likely to have a vaccine adverse event than they are to
need to be in ICU or
oxygen.
Yeah.
Okay.
So that's the bottom line on if for parents, should my child get vaccinated? What are the risks? Well, it's not just, don't think, when you think about risks, it's not just risks from COVID, it's risk from adverse reactions, serious adverse reactions to the vaccine.
Yeah. Yeah, which is the elephant in the room, of course. There was a major protest in London. Parents, family members, whatever, marching, people basically holding up photos of people they knew or themselves who'd had vaccine adverse events, trying to draw attention to it. I mean, I don't know what kind of help, if any, they get, especially when they claim, or specifically try to maybe sue on that basis. They probably find it very difficult to make any headway.
Last point on vaccines and COVID and infection, all that kind of stuff, immunity. Is immunity conferred by vaccines, or do people have immune systems? Well, people have immune systems, it seems. This is from Nature magazine. It's from talking about an article or a paper published. I'm not sure where it was published, but anyway, it's been reported on by Nature here, and they basically say that if you've had if you came in contact with Omicron, now remember Omicron was started about last December, so 7-8 months ago, whatever, it was all the talk, early December, so really 8 months ago, Omicron was all the talk, and people coined it after a little while when they looked at it, and studies out of different places showed the amount of hospitalization from Omicron. They said this is a nothing burger. It was South Africa, actually, that woman that researcher in South Africa first came out and said, look, this Omicron thing is just a nothing burger, really. So yeah, Omicron was coined the Omicold, right? Because it basically gave cold-like symptoms. So and then that was in last December, early December. So between then and now, a lot of people got exposed to Omicron. And good news is that these new variants, BA4, BA5, if you were infected with Omicron, if you got that sniffles or the cold, whatever, over the past 7 or 8 months, then if you just scroll down to, yeah, go a little bit more. Yeah, I think it's in that paragraph, but keep going. Yeah, okay. At the top there, yeah. The researchers found that infection with a pre-Omicron variant prevented infection with the BA or BA4, BA5 with an effectiveness of 28%. That's a pre-Omicron variant. And that prevented symptomatic reinfection. Prior infection with Omicron granted stronger protection. It was 79.7% effective at preventing B4 and B5 and 76.1% effective at preventing symptomatic reinfection. So basically, if you've had Omicron, if you had the sniffles over the past 7 or 8 months, so you felt like, oh, I had the COVID, or even if you got tested for it and you were tested positive, then that suggests that these two new variants that are floating around now, which again are undoubtedly have reduced function, are not as serious. They're more infectious, but that happens. The more infectious, they talk about it as being super, because Omicron was talked about as being really infectious, way more infectious than Delta. Oh my God, Omicron. And then was, hang on, it's Omicron. Forget about who's being infected by it. What are the symptoms? Symptoms are sniffle, bit of a sore throat, maybe, down for a day or two, and then you're fine. So kind of cold. BA4 and BA5 now are like, whoa, this is Omicron on steroids. It's super infectious. Yeah, but as everybody knows, anybody who's an epidemiologist, I'm not, but anybody who has read the A, B, and C of epidemiology is like, they know that as viruses mutate, they lose function and they lose virulence, i.e. the strength of the symptoms they provoke, but they very often become more infectious in the sense that they spread more. So basically, if you've had Omicron, if you had the sniffles over the past 7 or 8 months, then these new super transmissible BA4 and BA5, you have somewhere in the region of 80%. And again, that's probably means, it's hard to define, but 80% protection, natural immunity protection against these, i.e. you won't get the sniffles again. You're 80% likely to not get any more sniffles from any of these new variants. And there's no reason to think that won't continue as this virus mutates into other stupid variants, more retarded variants, basically. It goes from like a nice, it goes from like a well-formed, I don't know, it goes from like, it goes from who's a model male? It goes from, let's say, Brad Pitt. I don't know.
He was. That's
years ago. Anybody, like somebody in the cover of Men's Sports Illustrated, to Shrek. Right, and then down to Frankenstein or whatever. This is the way the virus is transforming. It just can't do as much. It's not as effective anymore. That's what happens with random mutation, right? Random mutations are, as anybody who knows, it's like random mutation is blind mutation. It's the blind watchmaker. The blind watchmaker is supposedly an oxymoron, if there ever was one, but that's that stupid Dawkins guy. But anyway, it's like taking a paragraph of text, a coherent paragraph of text, and randomly changing some letters and expecting that it'll make more sense afterwards. That's what happens to viruses. They just become more...
Yeah.
Anyway, what else is going on? Is Putin dead yet?
Well, they're not sure.
Are you sure?
They're not sure. They've suggested that a body double went on his behalf to Iran last week.
Yeah, a robot body double.
Because remember what you're supposed to, if you're up to date on the Ukraine war, Putin was hiding away and he wasn't talking to anyone because he's afraid of COVID, and if he's afraid of catching it from other world leaders. So then, of course, they followed up. They said he might have died, actually. He might be very sick and have died. So the news last week...
Look how different he looks, though. Can't you tell? Look at him in Iran there. That's not Putin.
No, that's him.
Which is the body double?
Who knows?
Is it the guy on the right? In the right picture?
In the
turban?
In the turban.
Yeah. That's definitely not Putin. Like, that's definitely a body double. It's not a very good body double, though. No, that's Ayatollah. And
No, it's not.
no, it's not. No, that's no. The Ayatollah is the guy on the left in the suit. I don't know these days. There's so many body doubles. How can you tell? Anyway, so he doesn't have a body double, and he's not dead, and they're not losing the war in Ukraine. And what else?
He's not afraid of COVID.
He's not
obviously.
afraid of COVID, and
Yeah, it was interesting. I thought, not for the reasons the media said, but Iran has the second highest, largest proven natural gas reserves on Earth behind Russia. So part of his trip was to cement a deal in which Gazprom would develop Iran's massive gas reserves,
yeah, Pars
which
oil
are
too.
effectively
Or Pars gas.
on ice by the global system. The globalists kept it. No.
Oh,
When
Russia-
you behave
Yeah.
or become
And Russia
a normal
wasn't
country,
interested either because it was
Russia
competition.
said to hell with. Well, yeah, that's what you would think, right? So why would Russia help?
Well, because it was competition back then, but now the chessboard has changed.
Yeah.
You know, and it makes more sense now to bring that online. You know, because we're not friends anymore. The West and Russia aren't friends anymore, so it's all change. Yeah. Ukraine, you don't hear much. It's just continuing on. We're waiting for the other shoe to drop in Ukraine, basically. Russian troops are making slow and, well, I mean, you say slow, but we've talked about this so many times, but just baked my noodle the way they kept on saying Russia's going so slow, it's not going the way they expected. They should have taken Kiev in the first 2 days, but they didn't, and they still haven't taken Kiev. They haven't taken anything. It's like people are just so there's so much crap on Twitter from people who have no clue, no understanding, not even a cursory basic understanding that they could get themselves from just looking at the situation, but they're so ideologically possessed in the Slava Ukraine, Zelensky's my hero and all that kind of stuff that they just don't care about the facts, you know? I mean, the Ukrainian army, like we've said before, was being built up, trained, armed, funded for 8 years, specifically for a war in eastern Ukraine. And the bulk of the well-trained, well-equipped Ukrainian forces had been pushed into up to the borders of the occupied or the self-declared independent Donetsk and Luhansk People's Republic. That's where they were all amassed. So then that's the bulk of the opposition that Russia has to deal with. So why is Russia taking so long to deal with pretty much all of the Ukrainian army? Well, because it's all of the Ukrainian army. It's NATO trained, armed, funded, and has been for 8 years. Why is it going slow? It's not going slow.
Well, no. Yeah. The developments are that Russia has withdrawn about 80 to 90% of its armed forces from Ukraine. They're not in Ukraine anymore. You see, that's incredible. I couldn't believe when I heard that, but it's the case. They're back in Russia, resting and refitting for the next stage. That's the best guess from retired U.S. Colonel Douglas McGregor. That he's expecting in the next few weeks there'll be a major new advance of a different type. So you're like, well, that can't be right. They're still fighting. Yeah, it's actually almost all being done by the Chechen, still under Russian military commands, Chechen militias and the locals themselves. This is an interesting thing that keeps coming back up. It occurred again in conversation when Putin was discussing Syria with Erdogan and Raisi in Tehran last week. Russia went with the same message it's had about Syria for the last 6 years, which is, let's stitch this up. The US needs to get out of northeast Syria. The US needs to stop sending terrorists from its base at Al Tanf on the Jordanian border into Syria, etc., etc. And I presume he also said similar. He didn't make an embarrassment out of Erdogan, but I'm sure he was saying, look, can you please back off from the northern border? We need to give Syria back to Syria. But he keeps saying the same thing, and you see it in the actions as well. Russia could send in big guns. They could send in a landing force and the same kind of number of military forces they had at the beginning in 2015. But they quickly withdrew because their guiding ethos is always that it seems to be that if you gift someone something, they'll never appreciate it. They'll never hold it. They'll quickly forget it. So I think the same principle is at work as they do in Syria. They will help, but only up to a certain point. Syrians need to rise up and fight themselves. Same here in Ukraine. It's got to be led substantially by the local militias. We'll give you weapons, we'll give you training, we'll give you satellite stuff, we'll help you shoot down drones, whatever it takes. We'll give you guns to counter the HIMARS the Americans have given to the Ukrainians. We'll make sure there's parity, but you people have to lead it. You need to remember this.
Yeah, well, that's
If we do it for you,
yeah, well, they have. But the thing is, they have been. Even the people in the forces in DPR and LPR have been leading, actively involved.
Yeah.
To the center.
they make up most of the personnel doing the fighting.
Well,
They do now, certainly at this juncture.
yeah, but that's because most of the fighting is done in the DPR and LPR. You know what I mean? They're taking a break now because they've achieved that goal. But there are still plenty of Russian troops actively involved because their goal clearly is beyond the DPR and LPR. You know what I mean? You can't expect the people in DPR and LPR to extend them. Well, they will, but you can't expect them to lead or to do most of the fighting.
Lead, but they've
to do most of the fighting outside of the DPR and LPR.
They said we're going 300 kilometers beyond our border to make sure these bastards aren't right next door to us.
But that's Russia has to be heavily involved in that.
Yes,
like,
of course.
You know,
definitely. That's what I think what the next stage would be.
Yeah.
What would be.
No, but I was speaking more specifically to the fact that people are saying like that, you know, that complaining about how throwing shade at the Russian military and the Russian government and stuff, saying that they weren't making any progress, that it all had gone wrong, blah blah blah.
Well,
but they don't recognize, they don't understand that key fact that, which is a key part of it that's covered up, which is that the US provoked this war by arming, training, and funding a capable, large Ukrainian military for the past 8 years for the purpose of invading Donbass and possibly Crimea, and then giving a problem to Russia right on its border. And that's why it's taken so long, because that's where most of the that's where their job was focused, because that's where most of the well-trained Ukrainian military has been dug in, well entrenched along the contact line in eastern Ukraine. So it's just, I don't even know why I address it. It's just stupid, but I feel I have to address it because there's such a level of ignorance on social media. But not just in social media, in the Western government as well. Like, but they're lying.
We'd have a NewsReal running like 365 days a year, just dealing with
the bullshit.
So I try and like pick out what has actually happened. So another interesting part of the discussions in Tehran was to agree a deal, which was signed off when Erdogan arrived home in Istanbul. Between Shoigu was there to sign it, which I thought was interesting.
Well, that
was the grain deal, right?
A pointed reference to this is as much a defence military agreement as it is agricultural, because it's presented as opening up the ports for the delivery of grain, right? And it was the Ukrainian agriculture minister who signed the agreement, and the Russian defence minister who signed it.
Yeah, specifically 3 ports, all of them basically in and around Odessa. Less than 24 hours later, there's massive military strikes. Well, massive caliber missiles, long-distance sea-based missile launchers against the port in Odessa. Yeah. Of course, the screamers in the West go, there, you see, you can't trust Russians. They sign something and then they come and stab you in the back. So I have to admit, it doesn't look like Russia doing its part to, quote, guarantee the safety of the port at Odessa. But they did claim, well, for what it's worth, the Russian MOD has since said, well, what we targeted at the port were
boats, were ships.
Specifically the military boats that are used for launching America's Harpoon missiles. They never countered it, but when the Americans boasted that they sunk the Moskva, the Russian flagship, with Harpoon missiles, that's part of the messaging here. They claimed that one of them was a warehouse at the port in Odessa that housed these damn things. So that's what blew up. So they said, well, the letter of the law was, we're going to do our part to guarantee the
safety,
the cargo, but we never said anything about stopping.
No, of course,
on military targets.
No, but of course they wouldn't. Yeah, for sure.
I wonder, in fact, if they did that preemptively, because maybe I would imagine that the powers that be would have tried to nix this deal in some way by creating something that forced Russia to do something else at Odessa or near Odessa, which they could go, look, see, Russia bad, doesn't hold up. It's trying to starve the world. Putin's trying to create global famine, blah blah blah. So the attack may have been actually preemptive against some provocation.
To stop the West, the Ukrainians at the behest of the West, to stop them from maybe firing a missile, blowing up a grain ship as it leaves Odessa port.
Well,
You think, that's beyond them, or
definitely.
You know what I mean?
Looking
Not
at
at all.
cards. I have a video. We won't show it. It's actually from a month ago. A citizen journalist was in Lugansk. So it's Lugansk that's been liberated by. It's now, free for journalists to go around to inspect, and she's like this huge grain silo site that locals say it was firebombed by the Yukis on their way out.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
So
yeah.
that kind of sabotage was going on for sure. The HIMARS thing, the Russians claimed that 4 back up. The US made a big show of sending 12 of these super special long-range multiple rocket launch systems, which indeed they started using, probably mostly on civilians, but they did claim to have targeted actual ammunition depots behind the Russian line. The Russians claim to have taken out a third of them within 10 days. 4 of these $100 million launch systems each. The Pentagon response early last week was, no, Russian propaganda. Late last week, they quietly made another announcement that they're sending 4 more to Ukraine in another $100 million Ukraine aid package, thereby in their actions falsifying their BS and actually giving credit to the Russian report. So,
yeah, but it's all grist for the mill. That's more taxpayers' money to defense contractors. The more Russia blows up, the richer defense contractors get.
Zelensky hasn't got long. It's definitely last days of Berlin in Kiev. He fires the head of the Ukrainian equivalent of the CIA and the top lawman prosecutor.
And then backtracks
Quote,
and says, no,
for treason.
They were just, but then he backtracked and said they were just suspended.
Oh, really? I didn't hear that update.
Yeah, there was a backtrack, yeah. So, but that's not good, It shows that there's chaos reigning in the... It's all gone wrong, which was to be expected, It was always going to happen.
Other small update: the Yukis bombed Europe's largest nuclear power station last week.
Yeah.
Crickets in the media.
And just in case people were wondering, the CIA chief has said...
CIA chief says no intelligence that Putin is in bad health from 3 days ago.
Despite the fact that for the past 4 months, they've been saying exactly the opposite. But whatever. If you want to believe the propaganda, go ahead. It's...
yeah. Well, it's interesting that they have to update it now that he's left the fortress, right?
Yeah, exactly, yeah. Because he had to leave. So, he seems to be well enough to fly to Iran. So, well, whatever.
One of the things that the US is about to send hundreds of to the Ukraine is so-called kamikaze drones. It's kamikaze drones that they directed at the Zaporizhia nuclear power plant. Like I said, Europe's largest. This was in the news in March because there was a firefight there when the Russians tried to take it. And of course, it was spun as careless, feckless Russians tried to set off another Chernobyl by blowing up Europe's largest power station. And the truth gradually, more or less, came out. No, actually, they tried to protect, and the others just willy-nilly fired at it. Well, now it's like it didn't create a news cycle. It would have normally been the latest Bucha, but because it was so quickly, obviously, the case that it was the Ukrainian side who attacked it.
It had to go away.
They had to bury it. The Guardian's reporting on it is insane. Like, because it's still under civilian control, the same managers who were running it before, he gives a press conference, but now they're obliged to cite him in what he said. He said, it's all right. Some of our staff were injured. They didn't actually hit any reactor. Radiation levels are normal. He's just giving it what you would expect. But because he's the civilian manager of Europe's largest nuclear power station under occupied territory, they insinuate constantly that
he's being forced
to say all these things.
Yeah. Yeah, it's pathetic. So much confirmation bias.
Putin this week said the world order they're creating is totalitarian. Yeah, we know that. And he predicts revolutionary changes in the West in the coming years.
Yeah, for sure. Here's an example of how the US military is gearing up for some revolutionary changes. Just play that. These are US military exercises. So you have the troops with their firing blanks in a kind of mock village. I wonder what they're training for. Could be anything really, couldn't it? Yeah, it could be. That could be anywhere. Like that's just a nondescript urban area, right? A nondescript house. Oh, hang on a minute. What's that? I don't recognize that picture. Do you recognize that, Neil?
No,
You don't?
it's too far away. I can't see it. Ah, the Young dynasty.
Well, I suppose it's not that. It's not. I think that there's
Damien. Yeah. Wow. Yeah, I don't think you can infer that specifically for North Korea.
no
At their training centers, they're going to have faces of Putin, all of them,
shooting
will be
pictures.
lined up. You
yeah,
know.
but it just shows you what part of the world they're in. That let's say it's not. They're doing mock-ups of. Well, they always did that, right? That was always their agenda. It was either the Middle East or somewhere in Asia, right?
I think it could be Russia. The way the Brits are talking, they want a full scale ground war in Europe,
Yeah, right.
man to man, mano a mano, Russia against NATO.
Yeah, well, they won't be fighting in Russian houses. Then they'll be fighting in their own houses. There'll be no
Probably
picture,
in,
no
in
picture,
Europe,
no picture of Putin
neutral
hanging up.
territory, which is Western Europe.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah,
because the Anglo-Americans never like to do world wars at home.
Yeah,
you always
yeah.
do it.
it's too messy. Do it in
there.
someone else's garden. Back to global warming, I suppose, as a last comment from me. Anyway, this is a pearl of wisdom, I suppose you might call it, from our old friend Al Gore, Mr. Hot Air, global warming himself.
You know, the climate deniers are really in some ways similar to all of those almost 400 law enforcement officers in Uvalde, Texas, who were waiting outside an unlocked door while the children were being massacred. They heard the screams, they heard the gunshots, and nobody stepped forward. And God bless those families who've suffered so much. And law enforcement officials tell us that's not typical of what law enforcement usually does. And confronted with this global emergency, what we're doing with our inaction and failing to walk through the door and stop the killing is not typical of what we are capable of as human beings.
So the question is, how many children did you kill today through not taking any action on global warming?
Me.
Yes, you personally, yeah. I'm sure, well, it suggests that at least a few, like.
Well, I'd never thought about it until Al Gore prompted
Well,
me
you
to.
should,
Now
yeah.
I'm going to have to do some soul searching.
I think you should. And Damien as well should think about it.
Maybe I'll get a calculator out and
'Cause
see if I
together
can
that's
estimate how many
Twice as
children
many,
I killed
twice as many
today.
children.
Yeah.
Just standing at the door, waiting, letting people die
Yeah.
because you're not driving an electric car, basically. If you're driving an electric car, you wouldn't be killing so many children.
Or maybe I should be owning a multi-million-dollar beachfront home like Al Gore has. Then I would be killing less children.
No, that doesn't help.
But that's what he does.
I know, but do what he says.
Oh, not what he does. Okay.
Come on, Neil. You know this.
You know he's worth
drill.
$350 million personal wealth.
Investing in green energy,
Yeah.
green tech,
Yeah. He's not a billionaire, but he's
no vested
Up
interest.
there.
Yeah, no vested interest whatsoever in creepy Al Gore. Anyway,
it's a creepy comparison.
yeah, but it's probably. It's up there with the apocalypse, you know. It's up there with like, well, it's said in a kind of deadpan, kind of like,
Yeah.
you know,
He's kind of saying you're a pedophile. if
fatherly
you're-
way type thing. He's basically saying that it's the same, like massacring children is the same as taking no action on climate change. Yep, seems reasonable. It's not an extremist point of view at all. These people are not extremists. They're not irrational. They're not nuts. Anyway, yeah, I think we'll leave it there for this week, folks, unless you've got anything else. Neil, do you have anything else? Any more pearls of wisdom, just like Al Gore there?
Well, I've got a question. Does Biden have cancer or COVID
Got everything.
or both?
He's not sure. He'll let you know.
Isn't it like, yeah.
He'll figure it out. Or his
Can you imagine if Trump had let slip that he had cancer?
Yeah.
But when Biden does it, I think it's not the conspiracy, but everyone, supporters and opponents, kind of let it slide because they know he's got dementia.
Yeah.
But they're not
Well,
allowed
that's
to
it.
say that.
No, you're allowed to say that. Yeah, people on Twitter have been saying that. Oh, don't worry about that. That's just a mistake because of his dementia. It's
Right.
like, okay, can we talk about dementia now? No, dementia's normal. He's 80 years old. Of course he's got
They
dementia.
tried to impeach Trump on the basis that he was unfit. There's a clause, you
Yeah.
know, if the health is compromised,
Yeah.
they shouldn't lead.
Yeah.
Because if he has dementia, he can't be president.
Right.
So they're trapped in this. Yeah.
They're trapped for sure. Yeah, okay. I think we'll leave it there for this week, folks. It's nearly been 2 hours, but I'd always try and keep it under 2 hours. Yeah. Thanks for watching, listening, reading, commenting. Do we have any awesome comments, Damien? No? You weren't watching them, were you? You weren't reading the comments.
Yeah, they're great.
They're great. That's
You'll
it.
see them. Yep.
None of them worth exposing.
Well,
Well,
there's a lot of them.
there's too many, too many quality comments. Yeah. Anyway, so yeah, thanks for the commenters, because yeah, apparently commenting's good on our videos because algorithms, and don't forget to like and smash all the buttons, whatever, because that's good too. And yeah, we'll be back next week with another show. Until then, have a good week and stay sane. Don't stay safe. Stay sane.
See you next week.
See
Bye,
ya.
everyone.
Can't stop the signal now.